Hi, I'm Andrew Rodriguez, and welcome to Psycho Bible, babbling about psychology and theology. Okay, we urgently need to talk about H.R. 8404, the so-called Respect for Marriage Act, or as I like to call it, the Disrespect for Marriage Act. As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned this past month, the Democrats and RINOs panicked, anticipating that we would try to overturn Obergefell next. Obergefell versus Hodges in 2015 was the final nail in the coffin of the Defense of Marriage Act, which had previously defined marriage as the union of one man and one woman. But with its Supreme Court ruling, Obergefell versus Hodges legalized gay marriage throughout the whole country, voiding all state bans against gay marriage. Now, in his recent majority opinion about the Dodds case that overturned Roe v. Wade, Justice Clarence Thomas suggested that for similar reasons as why they overturned Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court should rethink its decisions on Obergefell and other cases. Well, the Democrats wasted no time putting together a law to codify their revisionist definition of marriage. Rep. Jerry Nadler introduced to the House of Representatives H.R. 8404, dubbing it the Respect for Marriage Act, on July 18th, and it passed in just a couple days. By the time I heard of it, it had already passed. And to make things worse, 47 fake Republicans in name only, bunch of RINOs, voted for it. So now it's off to the Senate. Now, my channel is not really about politics. If I do speak about politics, it's usually to grow awareness about bans against therapy for people who are looking for help with unwanted same-sex attraction or gender confusion. Bans that are taking away their right to therapeutic choice. So why should I care about this bill? Why should you care about it? Shouldn't we just get used to gay marriage? This is just how it is now. This is the new world. Well, first off, this bill would have major implications for religious institutions. I'm going to read some from an article from the American Family Association. It reads, "In order to protect the newly created right to, my quotes, same-sex marriage, the U.S. House has passed the Respect for Marriage Act. The bill is a threat to real constitutional rights, the rights to free speech, freedom of religion, and freedom of assembly. The legislation could also be used by the IRS to revoke the tax status of Christian schools, universities, and nonprofits. This was a leadership decision. The Respect for Marriage Act was introduced on July 18th, and it passed the House 3 days later. The vote in the House wasn't even close. The legislation has been fast-tracked to the U.S. Senate. There will be no committee hearings, and the bill could come to the floor at any time. In other words, it is a priority, and the Democrats will be willing to trade almost anything to get moderate Republicans on board. They need 60 votes to avoid a filibuster, which means they need 10 Republicans to support their radical agenda. And let me interject. Yes, it is radical, because when you understand what the word radical means, to the root, these revisionists, these sexual revolutionaries, are trying to go and change the root meaning of marriage. The so-called Respect for Marriage Act would essentially give federal protection to same-sex marriage. But that's not all. In doing so, the law would create a private right of action that activists will use to sue anyone who gets in their way. The bill also authorizes the Department of Justice to go after violators. Let's just look at the bill. It said the Attorney General could go after anyone who opposes or violates this bill if it passes. And I was looking at the bill. There have been no amendments. There's essentially no debate when it came up to vote in the House. There have been no revisions. It essentially will revoke the Defense of Marriage Act and replace it with this definition of marriage based on just two people of any sex. Okay, let me continue with the article. When it's talking about violators, This will include a wide array of Christian nonprofits, starting with adoption agencies and foster care providers and other groups that work with federal and state governments. The ultimate aim of the bill is to eliminate any chance of there being a legal challenge to Obergefell. State legislatures will be intimidated into doing nothing, as the supporters of traditional marriage are silenced and canceled. Worse still, the Respect for Marriage Act could be used by the IRS to try to force K-12 religious schools to hire same-sex married teachers. It could be used to try to require Christian universities to enroll same-sex married students. It could even be used to destroy the nonprofit status of pro-family groups like the AFA. And I'll add some more. Not just to enroll same-sex married students, but to require Christian universities to provide same-sex married housing and to prohibit churches from deciding which type of couples they'll marry. The effects of this bill will be far-reaching. But most importantly, I want to talk about the philosophical and theological foundation of this bill. Politics is downstream of culture and religion and philosophy. I am so sick of hearing people complain about Christians being involved in politics. And of course, it's always coming from the progressives or the moderate Christians who try to seem like they're more seeker-friendly, who complain about conservative Christians being involved in politics. You never see them complain about the progressive or liberal Christians involved in politics to push their social justice agenda. I actually thank God for the religious right, the movement that started decades ago for truly Orthodox Christians to get involved in the Republican Party and steer it toward virtues. It was those Christians involved in politics that got Roe v. Wade overturned. So let's not be mistaken about that. In fact, if you do your history, you'll see that in the early days of abortion, a lot of Republicans were okay with abortion because they saw it as a way to control the population and decrease the number of people who would drain the system. If it weren't for Christians dominating the GOP, it would never have become known as the Conservative Party. Without the Christian moral conscience, the GOP would be guilty of the accusations about just caring about wealth for big businesses. The Christian involvement gives the GOP certain moral causes it essentially stands for now. Without these causes, the Republicans are not truly conservative. So, we must fight to preserve the integrity of the conservative representation in our legislature. But with the Overton window shifting so far left over the past several years, causing disaffected classical liberals and libertarians to join forces with conservatives in the Republican Party, the waters in the Republican Party have been muddied. People have now fallen for the misconception that conservatism is just about liberty or freedom of speech and rights to bear arms. There's a tendency to think that conservatism is just about individual freedom from social demands. But all this is far too reductive. It demoralizes Christians and other conservatives from speaking up about gay marriage. We've just become resigned and said, well, this is just how the world is. We shouldn't try to fight it through politics or through legislation. And because this generation has been duped into believing conservatism is just about defending individual rights, people think, why should I impose my beliefs on others? What you're missing is that true conservatism is about conserving the traditions and structures that hold society together. If you're a true conservative, you should care about this bill, about pro-life bills, and bills that define what male and female are, such as H.R. 5, the so-called Equality Act. Because you should want to live in a society that bases its laws on respect for the reality of nature. For a conservative, just laws simply acknowledge natural law and protect it from being distorted and discarded. This is why our Constitution calls our rights inalienable and given to us by our Creator. Our founding fathers understood that the Constitution wasn't giving anyone rights. It was acknowledging and protecting rights already given by God. Therefore, a just society recognizes natural marriage as the only valid marriage. Because what is marriage? Marriage is the fundamental building block of civilization. It takes more than just having a bunch of people together to build a society. Throughout history, nation states start with kinship. And how do you get people of different origins, different parentages, to coexist? You join them together in a covenant bond that is mutually beneficial. Each party, the male and the female, looks out for the welfare of the other. What can ensure this bond? Permanency and sexual exclusivity. And that's what marriage is. And what has the capacity to reinforce a stable sexual union? Sexual complementarity. In this one flesh union, a whole man and a whole woman generate oneness, becoming a being that transcends their individual identities. It is only in this complementarity that the bond between man and woman has the capacity to produce new life, which then exponentially propagates this union down through generations. So not only does their marriage create a new unit in itself, but it can create new humans. So now the husband and wife look out not just for each other, but also for their children. And no other two humans are generally most invested in caring for a vulnerable and needy young human than the two people who brought him or her into existence. As Willard Harley argues in his book Defending Traditional Marriage, or as Katy Faust documents well in Them Before Us, marriage between the man and woman that created them provides for children what they need most to develop: safety and security. Natural marriage builds families, clans, tribes, and nations that are united through a shared identity. A movement to deconstruct family and marriage and its constitutive elements, man and woman, is a movement bent on destroying society. And that's what the sexual revolution has been aiming to do. The sexual revolution has been ravaging the sanctity of marriage for a long time. Of course, the failure of humans, individual humans and couples, to honor the goodness of each sex and the goodness of marriage gave opportunity to a revolution in the first place. But the revolution has become so mainstream now that there are no norms left to rebel against. So, next up on the agenda is to codify the new order, one not based on natural law, but based on the gratification of personal pleasure without commitment to the good of the other, and without responsibility, and without a recognition of reality. The reality of man and woman, the reality that children need their parents, the reality of what marriage is. As Jennifer Roback Morse from the Ruth Institute makes clear in her book, The Sexual State, the sexual revolution is built on three main lies. One, that sex is unrelated to marriage. This is the divorce lie. So, sex is really just about expressing affection or achieving personal pleasure. And two, that sex is unrelated to babies, the contraception lie. If we pursue sex primarily for pleasure, then babies are now an unintended or undesired consequence. So we must find ways to prevent or do away with pregnancies we don't want. And since we've already separated sex from marriage, then babies can also become a commodity. So we use surrogacy and IVF and gay adoption as a way to validate a union that is not designed to produce babies naturally. 3. The third lie is that men and women are not different in any essential way, or they are interchangeable except in ways that suit our whims. And this lie gives birth to the gender ideology, the gender lies. All of these beliefs contradict reality. They contradict just the nature, the way the world is, the way the world works, and our basis for morality. Therefore, the sexual revolution needs the state to use force, the force of law, to enforce these lies, to instantiate them, and thus re-engineer society. Because without the state, people will eventually realize that the sexual revolution just does not work. And they'll eventually just return to marriage and norms based on natural law. And we think that this is sexual liberation. No! On a deeper level, true freedom is found only in conforming to reality, to obeying God's laws. So, anarchy and libertarianism or liberalism aren't freedom. As Christians, we know that licentiousness is actually bondage to sin and the never satisfied cravings of the flesh. But true freedom is found in being bound to Christ. He is the author and perfecter of our faith, of what we put our trust in. In union with Him, our hearts are transformed, so we no longer desire to violate our nature, but we are set free to live as God designed and destined us to live. We are meant to image Him, our Creator, the most free being in all of reality. And so a truly free life is one in conformity to God's design, desire, and destiny for humanity. Look, even if we're not a Christian nation, any nation that follows God's laws, laws that are evident just in nature, that only a man and a woman can create a bond that forms a building block of civilization, any nation that follows that will be blessed. And blessedness is about living in such a way that reaps life. But if we continue with cementing in law the sexual revolution, we will reap a culture of death. And we've been reaping this culture of death already. We've been seeing it for decades with abortion. We're seeing it with children being sterilized with transgender procedures. We're seeing it with children of surrogacy and IVF growing up with a void left by the absence of one or both of the adults that brought them into existence. We're seeing it with the rise of mental illness, trauma, and suicidality among people with same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria, despite growing societal acceptance, and especially as we outlaw therapy options for them. The casualties of the sexual revolution are far and wide. So, please, legislators, let's not go down this slippery slope even further. Let's show respect to true marriage. To everyone else, please contact your legislators, contact your senators, especially those Republicans who might be on the fence, who need a swift reminder that you're meant to be conservative, that you're meant to uphold laws that honor reality. And It might be a lost cause, but maybe give a word to the Democrats in your state and the RINOs who voted for this bill already in the House. I got a couple in my state. Give them a piece of your mind. Let them know that, hey, do your job. You're supposed to be honoring what is true, good, and beautiful, and making that the basis for our laws that our society is based on. So, if I gave you something to think about, please join me in the comments, leave a like, subscribe, click that bell for notifications, and until next time, please know that Jesus loves you freely, fully, faithfully, and fruitfully, just like a true marriage should be.